The Browns-Bengals game started as a division clash and ended as something else entirely, a defining chapter in Cleveland football story. It had everything: records shattered, legacies rewritten, and an improbable comeback led by a rookie fighting more than just defenders. Myles Garrett on the stat sheet, but it was Shedeur Sanders' final drive, a symphony of control, confidence, and quiet defiance that made it unforgettable. And then came the locker room moment that sealed it all. If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed. Garrett, in front of his team, spoke not about records but about Sanders' heart. The weight of that gesture can't be overstated. Garrett's nod wasn't ceremonial, it was authentic. His respect for Sanders echoed a message the entire locker room had been living all season. Success starts within. From spiritual battles to emotional breakthroughs, Sanders' growth was forged under pressure, and Garrett's recognition made it clear. This team sees value in more than just performance. They see leadership, and they're backing it. Myles Garrett didn't just show up to the Browns-Bengals game. He took over. With one clean, dominant sack, he officially broke the NFL single-season sack record. That's right. History was made in real time. Garrett stood tall, towering over quarterbacks all season long. But this was a defining moment. The stat sheets confirmed it, and the crowd erupted, not just because of the record, but because everyone knew what it meant. It wasn't just a sack. It was a symbol of how Garrett had carried the Browns' defense through thick and thin, even with limited chances. Thanks to a defense that often struggled to give him optimal setups, Garrett found a way. Every game, every snap, he brought the pressure. Relentless, focused, and hungry. That record wasn't handed to him. It was clawed out of a season where Cleveland had everything to prove and not much room for error. Garrett's pursuit wasn't about showboating. It was about setting a standard. And on that field, he raised the bar for every defender in the league. But the moment that had people really talking didn't come from the stat sheet. It came from Garrett's post-game speech. Instead of basking in personal glory, he turned the spotlight. And who did he shine it on? Shedeur Sanders. Garrett didn't just throw out a few generic compliments. He went in with real admiration. He talked about resilience, growth, and mental toughness. Garrett praised Sanders' game-winning drive like a veteran saluting a new general. That kind of respect isn't given lightly, especially not from someone who just broke a league record. But Garrett's tone made it clear. He saw something in Sanders that went beyond rookie hype. He saw leadership, composure, and most importantly, the will to rise under pressure. Garrett knew what that drive meant, not just for the scoreboard, but for the locker room. He recognized a shift. This wasn't just another rookie trying to find his way. Sanders had arrived. The game had already delivered high stakes, but Sanders made it unforgettable. With the clock ticking down and everything on the line, he led the Browns on a drive that felt like a movie script. But it was real. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't perfect. But it was clutch. Every pass, every decision, measured, confident, and sharp. Sanders delivered the kind of performance that rewrites narratives and silences doubts. And here's the part that hits harder once you know the full story. Sanders wasn't just facing the Bengals' defense. He was battling himself. The internal struggles that had haunted him all season, the mental wear and tear, the spiritual fatigue, were all still there. But in that drive, he pushed through it, not by accident, and not because he suddenly felt better, but because he trusted the people around him and leaned into the moment. After the game, Sanders didn't hide from it. He talked about the pressure, about the spiritual battles he'd faced throughout the season, about how he had to learn to trust again, to believe in himself again. It wasn't dramatic for the sake of it. It was honest, and that honesty made a performance hit different. When a player admits they've been struggling and then goes out and delivers a win like that, it tells you everything you need to know about their character. Sanders said his teammates pulled him back into it at halftime, not just with words, but with belief. They reminded him of who he was. That kind of support doesn't come out of nowhere. It's built from hours on the field, in the locker room, through the losses and the wins. Sanders credited them, but you could tell he carried the weight and he refused to drop it. That's growth you don't always see in a rookie. In the locker room, the energy was electric, but when Sanders spoke again, it was clear the moment hadn't gone to his head. He wasn't celebrating like a star quarterback who just had his breakout moment. He was reflecting like someone who knew how close he came to breaking, not the defense, but himself. He talked about the darkness, about how hard it had been to stay focused, and about the voice inside his head that kept telling him he wasn't enough. He said it wasn't just about football. It was bigger. There was a spiritual weight he had to carry, something that doesn't get discussed often in post-game interviews. But he brought it up because it was real, and because winning that game meant more than a number in the standings. It meant he could still believe, still lead, still fight. That kind of vulnerability doesn't just humanize an athlete. It deepens the respect people have for them. At the press conference, Sanders doubled down. He didn't shy away from the mental side of the season. He owned it. He talked about the expectations, the noise, the comparisons, and how easy it would have been to check out. But he didn't. He stayed in it. He gave credit to the culture in the locker room, to teammates who held him accountable without judgment, and to coaches who didn't treat his lows like liabilities. He emphasized that it wasn't just about grit. It was about community, about brotherhood. When a rookie quarterback stands in front of the media and says he couldn't have made it without his team, that says something about the foundation being built. It's not just talent holding the squad together. It's mutual trust. And it showed. That win over the Bengals wasn't just another W in the column. It felt like a turning point. For Garrett, it was legacy-defining. For Sanders, it was breakthrough validation. And for the team, it was evidence that unity wasn't just a word being thrown around in interviews. It was showing up on the field. The comeback, the execution, the resilience, it all clicked. And if you looked at the sidelines, you could see it. The reactions weren't just hype. They were emotional. You could tell how much it meant. This team had been through enough ups and downs to know when a moment matters. And this one mattered. It was more than a highlight reel. It was a shift in momentum, a cultural checkpoint for a franchise that seen more than its fair share. What this game proved is that Cleveland isn't just surviving, it's evolving. Garrett and Sanders might be on opposite ends of their careers, but what binds them is leadership. Garrett leads by performance and principle. Sanders leads by heart and humility, and both are buying to something bigger than themselves. The locker room isn't just full of talent. It's full of people who are growing together, who are showing up for each other even when the scoreboard doesn't, who recognize that greatness isn't just stats. It's how you hold yourself when the pressure peaks. Garrett saw that in Sanders. Sanders felt it from his team. And together, they sent a message that echoed way beyond the stadium. If this is what the Browns look like when they're tested, the rest of the league should take notice. The foundation is no longer hypothetical. It's happening. The future isn't just bright. It's already here. And it's wearing brown and orange. Don't forget to like the video, drop a comment on your favorite moment from the game, and subscribe if you're riding with Cleveland's rise. This season just got a whole lot more interesting. Garrett's game day performance had all the hallmarks of a defensive masterclass. This wasn't just a player chasing a record. It was a man making a statement. His timing, his awareness, the way he read the quarterback's eyes before exploding off the line. It was surgical. And the Bengals felt every bit of it. The sack that set the record was just the climax. All game long, Garrett had been a nightmare off the edge, collapsing the pocket and throwing off the Bengals' rhythm. Even when he didn't get to quarterback, he disrupted everything. The opposing offense had to scheme around him, adjust plays on the fly, and constantly check for number 95. He was in their heads before he was even in the backfield. Afterward, Garrett didn't make the moment about himself. When asked about the sack record, he acknowledged it, sure, but he kept circling back to something else, teamwork, culture, and building something sustainable. He made it clear that individual accolades don't mean much if the team isn't winning. And more than that, he pointed to Shadur Sanders as the kind of leader Cleveland needed on the other side of the ball. It wasn't lip service. Garrett spoke with conviction, saying that Sanders had that thing, the kind of intangible presence you can't coach. And coming from a vet with Garrett's pedigree, that wasn't just praise. It was an endorsement, a passing of the torch. Not because Garrett is done, but because he sees where this team is headed and who's coming with him. On the field, Sanders didn't play like a rookie in one of the biggest games of the season. He played like someone who had seen it all before and was ready to take control when it mattered. That final drive wasn't just composed. It was surgical. Every check down, every read. It was a culmination of months of mistakes, lessons, and growth. This wasn't the first time Sanders had faced adversity, but it was the first time everything clicked when it truly mattered. No panic, no second-guessing, just controlled execution, even as the pressure mounted with every second ticking off the clock. The Bengals threw everything they had at him, and he responded with poise. When Sanders addressed the media again in the days following the game, he didn't rewrite the narrative. He expanded it. He went deeper on what he'd been carrying all season. The doubt, the scrutiny, and the internal voices that questioned if he was ready for this level. He didn't dodge the conversation. He leaned in. He talked about the role of faith and how spiritual resilience played a part in getting him through the darker moments. Not every athlete is willing to open up about that, especially not in such a public setting. But Sanders did. And the more he spoke, the more it became clear this wasn't just about football. It was about learning to lead even when you feel like you're falling apart. Back in the locker room, the celebration was loud, but Sanders' response to it was quiet strength. His teammates mobbed him, of course, but his focus was on the bond. He pointed to players who had picked him up when he felt down, to those who kept him centered when the game seemed out of reach. It wasn't a solo victory, it was collective. He acknowledged how easy it would have been to let the season's weight take him under. And at halftime, he said it was a turning point, not because someone gave a dramatic speech, but because the team didn't let him sit in doubt. They saw something in him even when he didn't. That kind of trust, it doesn't just change a game, it changes careers. By the time Sanders took the podium again, the tone had shifted. There was still humility, but also clarity. He wasn't just reacting anymore. He was leading the conversation. He spoke on the value of showing up mentally, even when the physical game feels off. About how leadership isn't loud, it's consistent. He credited the coaching staff for letting him work through the rough patches instead of yanking the leash. And he gave a nod to Garrett again, saying that hearing praise from a legend on the defensive end made him feel seen, not for what he could become someday, but for who he already was becoming, a quarterback who doesn't flinch when it gets hard. The Bengals matchup wasn't just intense. It was emotional. Everyone knew the implications. A win meant momentum, hope, and validation. A loss would have raised questions that no team wants to face in January. And for most of the game, it looked like things might slip away. The offense sputtered. The defense held. But cracks were showing. But that's what made the comeback so much sweeter. The Browns didn't dominate. They endured. And when the moment called for clarity and execution, they found it. That locker room celebration, it didn't look like relief. It looked like belief. They weren't just happy to win. They believed they were supposed. There's a new tone in Cleveland, and this game felt like the loudest note yet. For years, the franchise has cycled through false starts, rebuilds, and disappointment. But this win, anchored by Garrett's dominance and Sanders' breakout, signaled a real cultural shift. The talk around this team isn't about dysfunction anymore. It's about direction. Leadership isn't coming from press conferences and PR statements. It's coming from moments like these. A record-setting sack, a game-winning drive, a defensive star lifting up a rookie QB because he sees the bigger picture. That's the kind of foundation teams dream of. And in Cleveland, it's starting to look real. In a follow-up interview, Sanders gave even more context to his mental battles this season. He said there were weeks when he felt like quitting, not physically, but emotionally. The grind, the expectations, the pressure to be perfect, especially with the spotlight already on him. It got overwhelming. He admitted that there were times he second-guessed himself on simple reads, not because he didn't know the game, but because his head wasn't clear. And yet, he credited his teammates for never letting him drift too far into that mindset. He said what helped most wasn't someone telling him, "You got this." It was someone sitting with him when he didn't. That kind of emotional intelligence in a locker room, it's rare. But in Cleveland, it's becoming part of the culture. Garrett spoke one more time before the team headed into its next matchup, and his tone was even more focused. He said the sack record was nice, but it wasn't the goal. The goal was to win, to build something that lasts. And for him, seeing Sanders rise in that moment gave him more hope than any stat line ever could. He said what stood out to him wasn't the final throw. It was the way Sanders handled the adversity, the body language, the refusal to blame others, the quiet determination to get it done. Garrett said that's what leadership looks like. Not volume, not flash, just presence. And as someone who's been the face of the Browns' defense for years, Garrett knows what it takes. Back in the post-game locker room, Sanders was surrounded by voices, cheering, celebrating, hyped-up chaos. But his voice cut through differently. When reporters asked what clicked for him during that final drive, he didn't launch into cliches. He said it plainly. I stopped trying to prove something and just played. That shift in mindset, it said more than any stat line ever could. He wasn't performing to silence critics. He was playing to win with his team. And that perspective, letting go of the noise and leaning into the moment, is exactly what allowed him to lock in. Sanders wasn't fueled by ego. He was fueled by clarity. And that clarity became contagious in that huddle. In another segment later that week, Sanders elaborated on just how deep his internal struggles had gone. It wasn't about nerves or lack of preparation. It was about something more personal. He said he felt spiritually disconnected for most of the season. Like no matter how many plays he made, something was off-center. That's why his teammates mattered so much. Not just because they cheered him on, but because they gave him space to process. No forced positivity. No empty affirmations. Just presence. Sometimes that looked like a shoulder tap. Sometimes it was silence. But it meant everything. He said he never felt like a project. He felt like a teammate. For his part, kept the focus on growth. When asked why he spoke so highly of Sanders, he didn't hesitate. He said it wasn't about that one drive. It was about how Sanders carried himself the entire second half of the season. Through bad games, online criticism, and quiet self-doubt, Sanders never threw teammates under the bus, never lost his composure. Garrett said that's when he knew they had something real. He added that legacy isn't just about breaking records. It's about lifting others while you're at the top. And that's why he made sure Sanders got his flowers. Not out of pity, but out of recognition. Because Garrett knows, if Cleveland's going anywhere, it'll be on the backs of leaders like that. Segment. During that final Bengals drive, the tension in the stadium was heavy. Sanders could feel it. But instead of shrinking, he steadied. Every throw, every audible was made with intent. He wasn't rattled by missed throws earlier in the game. He wasn't forcing hero ball. He was composed, reading the defense, trusting his line, trusting his receivers. And in those final moments, the offense moved with rhythm, like everyone had finally found the same page. Sanders connected over the middle, then outside the numbers, then rolled out under pressure and made the defining throw that brought them into field goal range. It wasn't flashy. It was surgical. And it was that win put more than just points on the board. It changed the conversation around the team. For years, the Browns have been a headline for dysfunction, drama, and underperformance. But not this time. This game was different. It was measured, earned, built from within. The locker room chemistry was undeniable. These weren't players clapping for a camera. They were genuinely happy for each other. The trust was visible. In the way Sanders gave credit to his teammates before himself, in the way Garrett focused on culture over celebration, and in the way the team rallied not around one man, but around a collective effort. Garrett's sack didn't just break a record. It broke a pattern. For years, he's carried the defense, played through injury, and stayed composed even when the team struggled. But this year, something changed. There's less weight on his shoulders and more unity around him. And when that record-breaking play happened, it wasn't followed by a solo celebration. He immediately turned toward the bench, toward the guys who'd fought beside him all season. He didn't dance. He didn't flex. He pointed up, nodded, and walked off like a man who had more to do. That moment said everything. Garrett knows his legacy is growing, but he also knows he's not done. From the first whistle, the game felt gritty. It wasn't pretty football. Both sides made mistakes, but it was competitive from start to finish. The Bengals tried to rattle Sanders with blitz pressure, but he adapted. Garrett, meanwhile, made sure the Bengals never got comfortable. He wrecked their pocket integrity and forced early throws that stalled multiple drives. And when it came down to it, the Browns found a way, not through luck, through execution, through trust, through believing that the rookie QB who had struggled just weeks earlier was the same guy who could close the show. And he did. Later, in his official presser, Sanders was asked what message he hoped his performance sent. He didn't talk about redemption. He talked about learning. He said that success isn't about having the perfect mindset 24/7. It's about recognizing when you're slipping and pulling yourself back in. He made it clear that the game didn't erase his struggles, but reminded him that he could lead in the middle of them. And that message, it echoed across the team. Garrett even nodded in agreement when Sanders spoke those words from the podium. The team wasn't building around a star. It was building around someone who understood the weight of the jersey. Garrett followed up with a media availability of his own, and he kept the energy focused. He didn't want the team to get too high off one win, but he said it's okay to take a moment and recognize what it meant. He talked about accountability, not just showing up, but showing up with purpose. He said that kind of mindset, paired with Sanders' growth in the team support system, is what gives him real hope, not the hope of a hot streak, but the hope of sustainability, of building something that lasts beyond one game, one season, one record. Sanders gave one final quote that stuck with fans for days after. He said, "The battles I fought this season didn't happen on the field. They happened on the way to it." That line hit people hard because it reminded everyone that football isn't just a game of X's and O's. It's a game of belief, and some of the toughest plays are the ones you never see on tape. He talked about mornings where he couldn't find the motivation and nights when he questioned if he belonged. But in that Bengals win, surrounded by teammates who refused to let him fold, he found the answer, and now he's locked in, not just physically, mentally, spiritually. If this is the version of Sanders that's going forward, the rest of the AFC needs to be on alert. Let us know what you thought of Garrett's speech and Sanders' final drive in the comments. Drop a like if you're rooting for Cleveland's rise, and subscribe to stay plugged in as the Browns write their next chapter. This one, it was unforgettable.